Hello, and thank you for joining us here today for our tutorial on setting up and processing fringe benefits. There are a number of different ways fringe benefits can be handled, and we're going to cover the 4 methods that can be used to account for fringe benefits. The first method would be to set up the fringe benefit to be deducted throughout the year. The second way is going to be to set up fringe benefit to be deducted as a lump sum on the last payroll of the year. The third method is going to be to set up a fringe benefit after the final paycheck has been issued. We're going to cover both taxable and non-taxable ways of doing this. And finally, the fourth method is going to be to manually edit enhanced tax reporting to include the fringe benefit amount. First, let's look at setting up and processing fringe benefits that are deducted throughout the year. Here is an overview of the process on how to create the deduction for a fringe benefit and use it throughout the year. Once we review the steps, we will go into a live demonstration on how to set this up. The first thing that you're going to do is create the deduction, then you will activate the deduction. Then if using a variable amount entered on the time card, you're going to go into the time card entry and actually add that deduction to the time card. Then you're going to run the payroll calculation, and then you're going to go ahead and print the checks. Now it's going to be time for us to take a look at a live demonstration on how to do this process. Let's take a look at the steps to set up a fringe benefit to be deducted throughout the year. To record the fringe benefit with each payroll, create a deduction for the fringe benefit and attach it to the employee's record to be used for each pay period. You're going to select Payroll, Utilities, Maintain Deductions. This is where you will create the deduction. You're going to click the New option. You're going to enter an ID for the deduction. In this case, we will put in auto because we're going to set up an auto allowance. And the description will be auto allowance. From the method drop-down, choose the method in which the deduction will be calculated. Select fixed amount per pay period if the deduction amount remains the same for every paycheck. Otherwise, select variable entered on the time card. This will allow you to enter a different amount each time on the paycheck. From the category drop-down box, select company individual. This is because it is a deduction that's paid by the company and the rate is individual to each employee. Now you're going to define a credit account for the general ledger posting. Please refer to your CPA if you are unsure of which account to use. For this example, we're going to use a credit account of auto payable and we're going to use a debit account of auto expense. The next step is going to be to set the appropriate taxable fields for the deduction. Always consult with your tax advisor for assistance on the deduction taxable status. Some important things to note. If FWT is not selected on the deduction, the deduction amount will not be included in box 1 on the W-2. If SWT is not selected on the deduction, the deduction amount will not be included on box 16 of the W-2. In the active field, select active always. Now let's click on the W-2 button. This is where you're going to define where on the W-2 this deduction is going to be included. In the box number to use field, you're going to clear the none checkbox to be able to enter a box number in here. For this example, we're going to put in box 12 and then you're going to hit the tab key and that's going to open up the ID to use field, and this is where you would define the appropriate ID to use. Now we're going to save the deduction and exit Maintain Deduction screen. Now we need to activate the deduction on the employee. So we're going to go to Payroll, Employees, Maintain Employees. We're going to pull up our sample employee, John Akins, and in order to set the deduction as active for this employee, we're going to click on the Deductions button, and then we're under the ID field. You can either type in the deduction or you can use the lookup feature by hitting the 3 dots and pull up the desired deduction. You're going to make sure that the status says active, and then you're going to accept that. Notice that these options are grayed out, and that's because this is a variable entered on time card deduction. We're going to hit OK, and then we're going to save the employee record. Now we're going to go into the time card entry field. So we're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Time Card Entry. We're going to pull up the employee ID. John does have a standard time card on file, so we're going to say yes to accept that standard time card. Otherwise, you would manually enter the regular hours. And now we're going to use the drop down for the earnings type, and there you will see our deduction for the auto. Now, if you have an amount set as a fixed amount per pay period, you would skip this portion of the entry to add the deduction to the time card. So in the gross pay field, we're going to enter the amount of the deduction, and then we're going to accept that. And you'll note that the total on the pay is still going to be the full amount that they're receiving, but since this is a company paid deduction, that $100 will show up on the W-2. We're going to save the time card entry. Then we're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Automatic Payroll Calculation. We're going to, in this case, just include this one employee. We're going to run our calculation. We're then going to preview our payroll register. As you see, the company paid deduction is displaying right here for the $100. And now that the payroll register has been reviewed, we're going to go to Payroll, Processing, and print payroll checks. And then you would print your payroll checks as you normally would. Please note, after checks are printed, the employee's totals for taxable pay may be higher than the gross pay by the amount of the fringe benefit. That will occur if the fringe benefit is a taxable fringe benefit. Now let's look at setting up and processing a fringe benefit deducted as a lump sum on the last payroll of the year. Here's an overview of the process on how to create the deduction for this fringe benefit to be deducted as a lump sum on the last payroll of the year. Once we review the steps, we will go into a live demonstration on how to set this up. The first thing that you're going to do is create the deduction. Then you will activate the deduction for the employee. And you're going to process the employee time card, adding this deduction to that time card if using variable entered on time card. Then you're going to run the automatic payroll calculation and review your payroll register. If the result of the automatic payroll calculation shows a negative amount, go into the manual payroll calculation, select yes to use the calculated check, and then adjust the federal or state taxes as needed to make the check show a $0 amount. Then you're going to print the payroll checks. Now we're going to take a look at a live demonstration on how to set up the fringe benefit to be deducted as a lump sum on the last payroll of the year. To record the fringe benefit on the last payroll check, you're going to create a deduction for the fringe benefit and attach it to the employee's record to be used on the last payroll of the year. To do this, we're going to select Payroll, Utilities, Maintain Deductions. Here is where we're going to create the new deduction. Once we pull up Maintain Deductions, we're going to click New button to create the new deduction. We're going to call this deduction Auto with a description of Auto Allowance. From the Method drop-down box, we're going to select Variable Entered on Time Card, since we will be entering this on the time card when we enter that time card. The category is going to be Company Individual. This is because it is paid by the company and the rate is individual to each employee. Next, we're going to define a credit account. We're going to choose Auto Payable, and then we're going to choose a debit account. That is going to be Auto Expense. Of course, you want to check with your CPA on exactly which accounts you want to use that are specific to your company. The next thing we're going to do is look at the taxable status of the deduction. You will want to consult with a tax advisor for assistance on the taxable status of the deduction. If FWT is not selected on this deduction, the deduction amount will not be included on box 1 of the W-2. If SWT is not selected on the deduction, the deduction amount will not be included in box 16 on the W-2. If the fringe benefit is taxable and you do not want to withhold taxes, you will need to mark the deduction as taxable and manually adjust the tax withholdings, as we will be covering later with the manual calculation. Now, looking at the active date, you would want this to be active for the date to include your last paycheck of the year, since this is only going to occur during the last check. And we're going to go ahead and hit save. Now we're going to click on the W-2 button, and in the box number to use field, we're going to deselect the none and specify which box we're going to put it in. For example, we put it in box 12. If you need to enter an ID, hit the tab key and this will open up the ID to use field. Then you could type in the ID you would like to use. So if you wanted to type in, for example, auto, you could type in that in the ID to use. For questions on which box to specify, please consult your tax advisor for assistance. We're going to save the deduction, and then we're going to exit from the deduction screen. Next, you're going to go into Payroll, Employees, Maintain Employees. We're going to pull up the employee, click the deduction button, and then you're going to add the deduction to the employee. So we're going to pull up our auto allowance. Going to make sure that the active is selected, and since these items are grayed out, that means we're entering a deduction that's variable entered on the time card, so we'll actually enter that on the time card itself. If the amount were a fixed amount per period, you would enter the amount and rate in this field here. Going to click OK, and then we're going to save the employee. Payroll, processing, time card entry. We're going to pull up the employee. We're going to choose regular pay. We're going to enter the number of their hourly rate and the number of hours within the pay period. Then we're going to use the drop down again to choose deduction, auto, and then the gross pay amount. We're going to save that time card entry, and then we're going to go to payroll, processing, and automatic payroll calculation. We're going to run this calculation only for this employee. We're going to run the payroll register for the employee, and you're going to notice the deduction appears on the payroll register, and therefore it shows it calculated correctly. If you find it necessary to adjust the check calculations after the automatic payroll calculation has completed, you're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Manual Payroll Calculation. You're going to pull up the employee. You're going to say yes to use the calculated check information. Then you're going to click on Federal State Taxes, and here you would adjust the appropriate taxable pay and or company and or employee withheld amounts for the taxes. Of course, check with your CPA for the correct calculations on this screen. Once you have confirmed the amounts, you're going to go ahead and print your payroll checks. To print your payroll check, you're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Print Payroll Checks. And then you would print your checks as usual. Here's a note on negative check amounts. If the fringe benefit amount causes the check amount to be negative, the fringe benefit deduction should be processed separately. See option 3 on how to set the fringe benefits after the final paycheck is issued. However, in some circumstances, when the check is negative, the tax advisor may suggest to adjust the employee's FWT or SWT withheld amounts on the last paycheck calculation to resolve the negative check amount. To manually adjust the employee's check calculation amount after the payroll calculation, go to Payroll, Processing, Manual Payroll Calculation, and make the adjustment on the screen as we had covered before. What you would do is you would zero out the appropriate employee tax withheld amount and adjust it to the desired amount. Please consult a tax advisor for assistance on the amounts. Another tip is some employers calculate the check before adding the fringe benefit so that they get the FWT and the SWT amounts. Then they add the fringe benefit deduction to the time card and do the automatic calculation again. They can then edit the FWT and SWT tax on the manual calculation screen to get what they would normally withhold, so the employee receives a positive net check. Another option is setting up and processing a fringe benefit after the final paycheck is issued for the year. In most cases, the fringe benefit deduction is predefined and processed throughout the year or included on the final paycheck of the year before printing W-2s. However, if the last paycheck has already been issued, the deduction can be added to the W-2 through one of the following methods, depending upon if the deduction is taxable or non-taxable. Please consult with your CPA to determine the correct taxable status of your fringe benefit. We're going to cover two options here today. Option A is if the deduction is taxable, and option B is if the deduction is non-taxable. Here is an overview of the process on how to create the deduction for a taxable fringe benefit to be deducted after the final paycheck. Once we review the steps, we will go into a live demonstration on how to set this up. The first thing that we're going to do is create the deduction. Then we're going to create the other pay. Then we're going to activate the deduction. And then we're going to activate the other pay. We're then going to process the employee time card with the deduction and entering a zero amount for the gross pay of the other pay so that we can later make an adjustment to this. You're going to run the automatic payroll calculation, review the payroll register, and make note of the total tax calculated. Then you're going to go into the manual payroll calculation, click deductions and other pays, and enter the tax amount in the amount field for the other pay. This will make the check a zero amount net pay, and then you will go ahead and print your payroll check. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a live demonstration on how to do a taxable fringe benefit after the final paycheck is issued. Let's take a look at option number 3, the steps to set up a fringe benefit after the final paycheck is issued. There are going to be two different ways this can be done. Option A, if the fringe benefit should be non-taxable, and option B is if the fringe benefit should be taxable. Please check with your CPA to determine the taxable status of your fringe benefit. To record the fringe benefit after the final payroll has been issued, you're going to create a deduction for the fringe benefit. And if the deduction is taxable, you're going to create another pay and attach it to the employee's record to be used to calculate the fringe benefit after the final paycheck. So let's start by looking at option A, if the deduction is taxable. If the deduction is taxable, you're first going to set up a taxable deduction for the fringe benefit, and you're going to set up an other pay for the additional wages used to cover the calculated tax on the fringe benefit. To set up the deduction, you're going to select Payroll, Utilities, Maintain Deductions. You're going to click New and give the deduction an ID name. In this case, we will use Auto. And for the description, we will type in Auto Allowance. From the Method drop-down box, we're going to select the calculation method. We're going to select Variable Entered on Time Card. In the Category drop-down box, we're going to select Company Individual. Because this is paid by the company and the rate is individual for each employee. You're going to define what credit account and debit account is going to be used. You're going to contact your CPA for assistance with which accounts to use. So in this instance, we're going to use an auto payable as the credit account and automobile expense as the debit account. Next, we're going to select the appropriate taxable fields for the deduction. Consult a tax advisor for assistance on the deduction taxable status. An important note: if FWT is not selected on this deduction, the deduction amount will not be included on box 1 of the W-2. If SWT is not selected on this deduction, the deduction amount will not be included on box 16 on the W-2. Now, if this deduction is only to be active for a certain time period, you're going to select the From option, and then you're going to enter the active date, which is going to include the last paycheck of the year. Now we're going to look at clicking the W-2 button. If this deduction is to go into a specific box on the W-2, you would deselect the None option, and then in the box number to use field, you would type in the box that you were planning on using. Then you hit the Tab key, and that's going to open up the ID to use field to where you would enter in your desired ID. Again, for questions on which box to specify, please consult your tax advisor for assistance. We're going to save this deduction. We're going to exit out of the deduction screen, and now we're going to set up the other pay. That can be done by going to Payroll, Utilities, Maintain Other Pays. You're going to click the New button to create a new other pay. In the ID, we're going to give it a unique name. So in this case, we will do Auto OP. And then description would be Other Pay. From the Method drop-down box, we're again going to select Variable entered on the time card. In the Category drop-down box, we are going to choose Individual because this is not a system-wide, it is individual to this employee. We're of course going to define the general ledger account for the debit account. Again, consult with your CPA of which accounts to use. Now we're going to look at the taxable status of the other pay. It's important that you want to make sure Add to Gross is selected, and then since the deduction was taxable, we're going to deselect the taxable boxes on the other pay. Of course, consult with your CPA to ensure the correct taxable status of the other pay. In the active section, we're going to do the same as with the deduction. We're going to set it active from a specific date to a specific date. That's going to include the date of your final payroll of the year. We are now going to save the other pay. Now we are going to activate the other pay and the deduction on the employee. To do that, we're going to go to Payroll, Employees, Maintain Employees. We're going to pull up the employee in question. We're going to click on first the deduction, and then let's activate the deduction on the employee. We're going to make sure that the status is set to active, and because this is variable entered on time card, all these options will be grayed out because we will be posting the amount on the actual time card. Now we also have to close out of here and go to the other pays and activate the other pay on the employee as well. You're going to save this record. Now we're going to go in and do the time card entry. You're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Time Card Entry. You're going to pull up the employee ID. If they do have a standard time card on file, you're going to say no to load that standard time card. Since this check is only used to process the fringe benefit, we're going to go into the deduction and other pay. So we are going to deselect all the options that are not going to be active on this paycheck. The only two that should be active is your deduction and your other pay. Go ahead and click Save. And then please remember, you will need to reactivate these normal deductions and other pays when you process their next payroll. In the earnings list, we're going to click the drop down. We're going to scroll up to the fringe benefit deduction and enter the gross pay amount of the deduction and hit accept. Now we are going to select the earnings drop-down box and choose the other pay for the auto. We are not going to enter any amount into the gross pay field. This amount is going to later be entered during the manual payroll calculation. We're going to save the record. We're going to go to Payroll Processing, Automatic Payroll Calculation. We are going to run the calculation. We'll get the message that one or more employees has a negative check. That's correct, so we're going to hit OK. And then of course we got the direct deposit message as well because Akins is on direct deposit. We can review our payroll register. And note, you will see that we had a negative deduction in other pay and of course the negative taxes. So this is company paid, but we are calculating taxes on it, so the amount of the check will be negative. We're going to close out of this. And now we are going to enter the manual payroll calculation so we can adjust the other pay amount to account for those taxes. We're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Manual Payroll Calculation. We're going to pull up the Akins employee. When it asks if we want to use the calculated check, we're going to say, now we are going to click the Deduction Other Pays button. We're going to enter the amount of the calculated tax, $8.35, into the other pay option. We're trying to make the value of the check 0. So we're going to hit OK. And now notice that the net pay is 0. We're going to save the record. We're going to say yes to the warning about the 0 amount check. We're going to close out of the calculation screen. And next you would go to Payroll Processing and print payroll checks. You're going to continue to print your 0 amount check, and then that auto allowance that is taxable that you're processing after the final paycheck will be calculated correctly. Now let's take a look at the overview of the process on how to create the deduction for a non-taxable fringe benefit to be deducted after the final payroll check. Once we review the steps, we will go into a live demonstration on how to set this up. So the first thing that you're going to do is create a non-taxable deduction under Maintain Deductions. Then you're going to activate the deduction for the employee under Maintain Employees. Then you're going to process the employee time card, making sure that you enter the gross pay of the deduction. You're going to run the automatic payroll calculation, and then you're going to print the payroll checks. Now let's go ahead and look at a live demonstration on how to set up the non-taxable fringe benefit after the final paycheck is issued. Basically what you're going to do for this one is set up a non-taxable deduction for the fringe benefit amount. So you're going to select Payroll, Utilities, Maintain Deductions. We're going to click the New button to create a new deduction. We're going to enter the deduction ID and the description. From the Method drop-down box, we're going to select the calculation of variable entered on time card. In the Category drop-down box, we're going to select Company Individual because it's a company paid deduction and it's individual to each employee. And we're going to define the general ledger credit account, which we'll do as auto payable. And now we're going to do the debit account, which is the expense. Please consult with your CPA for which accounts to use. You're going to deselect the taxable checkboxes since this is non-taxable. Again, please consult with your CPA to verify the taxability status. Also, please note that since the FWT taxable is not selected on the deduction, the amount will not be included in box 1 on the W-2. Also, since the SWT is not selected on this deduction, the deduction amount will not be included in box 16 on the W-2. In the active section, you can select the From option and put in the date that includes the last paycheck. We're going to click on the W-2 button. In the Box Number to Use field, clear the check for the None option and enter the appropriate W-2 box for this fringe benefit. Then click the Tab button, which will open up the ID to use to where you can enter the ID you would like to use for this deduction. For questions on which box to specify, please consult your tax advisor for assistance. Now we're going to save the deduction, close out of the deduction screen, and now we're going to go to Payroll, Employees, Maintain Employees. We're going to select our employee. In this instance, we'll use Brooks. We're going to click on the Deductions button, and we're going to activate this deduction for this employee. Notice, since it's variable entered on time card, the amount rate field is grayed out. We're going to hit OK, and then we're going to save our changes. Now we're going to go to Payroll, Processing, Time Card Entry. Note, since this check is only used to process the fringe benefit, you're going to deselect any other deductions and other pays that are active for this employee. So we're going to choose Brooks, and then we're going to click the deductions and other pays. We're going to deactivate everything except for the auto. Then we're going to hit save. Please note, you will need to reselect these deductions to active when you process your next payroll. In the earnings drop-down box, we're going to select the deduction and enter the gross pay. So we're going to select the deduction auto, and then we're going to enter the gross pay or the amount of the fringe benefit. And we're going to click accept. Then we're going to hit save, payroll, processing, automatic payroll calculation. We're going to include, for this instance, the employee that we're working with, and then we're going to hit OK. We're going to preview the calculation, and notice that you'll see your auto deduction showing over here, but that the net pay amount is 0 because this was a non-taxable deduction. We're going to close out of this screen, and now you will go to print your payroll checks. Please note that since FWT is not selected on this deduction, the amount will not be included in box 1 of the W-2. And also, since SWT is not selected on the deduction amount will not be in box 16 on the W-2. If these need to be included in those boxes, those items would need to be checked on the deduction prior to processing the fringe benefit. The last option that we are going to look at is how to manually edit enhanced tax reporting to include the fringe benefit amount. Here is an overview of how to manually edit enhanced tax reporting to include the fringe benefit amount. Once we review the steps, we will go into a live demonstration on how to set this up. So the first thing that you're going to do is go to Payroll, Taxes, and Print W-2 Forms. Then you're going to continue to process through the enhanced tax reporting screens, select the employee that needs to be edited, edit the necessary boxes to include the fringe benefit, and then print the W-2. For further information on how to process W-2s, see our tutorial Processing and Correcting W-2s. Now let's take a look at the live demonstration on how to manually edit enhanced tax reporting to include the fringe benefit amount. This would be used if the employer does not want to set up a deduction in BusinessWorks and is only concerned with the fringe benefit amount appearing on the W-2. We're going to go to Payroll, Taxes, and Print W-2 Forms. We're going to select the W-2, W-3. We're going to select the year. In this case, since we're using a 2016 sample company, we'll choose 2016. And we're going to hit OK. We're going to go through the W-2 Setup Preparer wizard, verifying our company information. And for further information on using enhanced tax reporting to prepare or correct a W-2, please see our video tutorial based upon this subject. Once the enhanced tax reporting grid displays, you're going to select the employee that you wish to edit. In this instance, we'll edit William Wright. I recommend sliding this bar over so you get to see more of your employee totals in one screen. And what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to add a new box to the top of the grid so that you can add that box to the W-2. So to do this, you can click up in the gray area or under the green box area. You're going to right click your mouse and you're going to select Insert Column. You're going to give the column a new name, and if there's any default value you want to go to every employee, you would enter that here. Otherwise, you will just click OK. You'll notice the new item has been added, and above the auto description we gave it, there's an unassigned option. We are going to drop down that arrow next to the unassigned, and we are going to drop down the box and select what box the fringe benefit should go into. We're going to select box 12, and then you're going to select the appropriate code that ties to the deduction that you're using. In this instance, you would consult with your CPA to ensure the correct box is being selected. Then in the column, you would align the column with the field that you need to enter the amount for. You would place your cursor in that field, and then you'll type in the amount that you would enter for the amount of that fringe benefit. Then you would just continue with your W-2 processing as usual, and that amount will be added to box 12 on the W-2. I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to view our tutorial today. I hope you enjoyed this session and that you will check out our other sessions available out on the Sage knowledge base. Thank you.